Do you also get nightmares when you have to work with nested ternary types like these? Because I do. That's why I've created TypeBuddy, a plugin and web app which will take care of this and lets you write your types as functions. Let's get started. So as you can see here, we have two different types. Now let's get started with the first one, this simple type here. This simple type is quite easy to understand because we have a simple ternary. We check if this t extends string, and if it does, then we return a string, otherwise we return never. Now this is similar what we would do in normal JavaScript or TypeScript code. When we have a simple if-else case, we could use a ternary. But in JavaScript, we also have the possibility for more complex if-else cases to not use a ternary, of course, but use these if-else blocks. Now in TypeScript types, we don't have this possibility, and this is why we have constructs like this. For example, we have this type here, find type, and we have a first check if this is a boolean, string or number, and if this is the case, we return it. Otherwise, we check if A extends an array. If this is the case, then we do a recursive call to our type, otherwise we return never. Now we can still read this, but it gets more complicated when we add more else-if cases. Now I already put this on multiple lines to make this better readable, but what happens is when I format this, we can see everything gets put onto one line, and this gets unreadable quite fast. And this is exactly why I've created the TypeBuddy plugin. So let me show you how this works, and we will get started with the simple type here. So I just hover over this type. And as you can see here, we have some hover information, but in my case, we see something different than when you would do it without the plugin. Because what we see is we have a function representation of our type. And as you can see here, this looks similar to JavaScript because this function representation is in a JavaScript-like syntax. Now, of course, this is not valid JavaScript or TypeScript, but it shows you in a really simple way what the type is. Now we have the name here of this function, which is the name of the type. Then we have the arguments here, which are the generic type arguments we have in our type here. And we have the if-else case, which represents our ternary expression in our type. Now in this case, it's not really that helpful because it's easy to understand what this simple type does. But let me show you how different it looks when we hover over our find type here. So let's hover over this, and we can see we now have this find type function, which is not nested at all, but we have a simple if-else case here. So in this case, we can see it's, in my opinion, much better readable than this nested ternary, because we can see that in the if-else we return A, in the else-if case we call our find type recursively, and in the else case we return never. So when we compare this to our nested ternary, I can read this code on first glance, but when I check the type here, I have to think first, well, what really happens in this type? Now this is just a preview feature, but of course we can also edit our type as a function. So what we can do is we hover over this and we can click here on open in TypeBuddy editor, and when I click on this, a new editor window pops up with the function representation here and the type preview on the right side. So what I now can do is I can, for example, add another else-if branch, and the TypeBuddy plugin will then generate the type for us. So I say here I have an else-if, and I say A extends date, and in this case you want to return object, for example. And as you can see, this immediately created the valid type in our preview window. Now, of course, we can also do other stuff. We can rename this. We can, for example, say this is not called find type, but find, and then we rename this also. And we can see the type here is immediately updated again. Now what we could do, of course, now is we could manually copy this type here and paste this in a TypeScript file, but TypeBuddy of course can help us with that. So what we will do is we just save this file, and the only important thing is that we save it as a TB file, as a TypeBuddy file. So let's call this typebuddy.tb. And when I save this, we can see something interesting happened. Here another file was created. So this file is called the same as our TypeBuddy file, but with a d.ts suffix. So let's click on this, and as you can see now, this now contains the valid type which was created from our TypeBuddy file here. And I really like this approach because this allows us to write our types in our TypeBuddy file and let then the TypeBuddy compiler create for us our types instantly. Now, what I also really like about this function representation is that we can also call other types as functions. So for example, we have our function here and we call this string or never. And then we just pass it our generic type here. And we say, well, if E extends string, in this case, we return string, otherwise we return never. And now what we can do is we can just call this in our function here. So let's say in the case where this is a string number or a boolean, we call string or never and pass it our a. And as you can see, this still creates a valid type here. So maybe not for all of you, but for me, it's much easier to work with the types looking like functions because they look much more familiar to me than normal types, because we mostly work with these if-else cases and with functions in JavaScript or TypeScript. So of course now when I save this file, our d.ts file got updated again. So let me click on this. And as you can see now, we also have our string or never type in there. So if you don't like to use types at all, you can just start to work with type body and the function representation. Now, if the type body preview here is not open, then you can just use a command palette command to open it. So we just call type body here and we call open type viewer. When you run this, then the type preview gets opened immediately and you have your preview right beside your type body file. Of course, we can also do the opposite. So we can just go into our type body d.ts file here. And what we now can do is we can run the type body show type functions command. When I run this, we can see now we have a function preview of our types right beside our editor. So the same thing that would happen when we hover over this, you now have right beside in your function preview. So when we now start to edit our code, we will see the changes get applied to our preview editor immediately. So for example, when I change this here, we can see this also got changed here in our function preview. The else if case with the date is now gone. And the same also happens, for example, when I change this back, it also gets updated immediately. So if you still prefer to work with normal types, but you want to see a preview how they would look like in the function representation, then this preview is exactly what you need. So these are the features of the type body plugin for VS Code, but I know that some of you and me also don't work with VS Code that often. They work with IntelliJ or WebStorm or other IDEs, and currently this plugin only exists for VS Code. Now because of that, I also created a web application which allows you to use type body in the browser. So let's switch over to the browser and let me show you how it works. So as you can see, we are now in the browser and we are on my GitHub page for type body. So of course I will add a link to the web app in the description below, and you can do here basically the same what you would do in the plugin. So I already copied the types we had in our d.ts file, and let's paste this in here on the left side, because as you can see, the left side here is for normal types. So the normal types you would write in TypeScript, and on the right side we have the function representation. Now, as mentioned, you can do exactly the same as before. So for example, when you want to change this from date to object, we can change this here and it will get updated immediately here in our function representation. Now, of course, this is not just one way. We can also change our function representation and our types will get updated. So for example, when I want to remove this recursive call, I can also do this. And as you can see, the types here on the left side get updated immediately. So as you can see, the type body editor in the browser provides the same functionality as the plugin for VS Code. So of course, type body is still in its early stages. So if you find any issues with it or bugs, or you have a suggestion what kind of feature you'd like to have implemented, just let me know in the comments or open an issue on GitHub. I will add a link to the GitHub repository in the description below. But I hope that for some of you, type body might be helpful to write and understand your types much easier. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date for the newest TypeScript stuff. And also let me know in the comments what kind of topics you'd like to have covered in future videos. See you in the next one. Bye.